The castle of Valdoria stretched high into the clouds, its spires cutting sharp lines against the silver sky. The kingdom had seen centuries of glory, but now it felt tired, its walls heavy with whispers and shadow. The great hall where nobles gathered was vast and gilded, yet the golden sheen could not hide the cracks in the marble floors. Torches flickered along the walls, their light dancing like ghosts across tapestries depicting battles long past. Outside, the wind howled through empty courtyards, carrying the scent of rain and distant forests. Inside, the hall was alive with music, laughter, and the clinking of goblets. Noblewomen in flowing gowns shimmered with jewels, while men in silken coats exchanged words of power and secrets. But among them, one man stood apart, unmoving, silent, wrapped in the kind of armor that seemed to belong more to legend than to life. Lord Kalen. Kalen's armor was heavy and black, etched with lines that caught the light in unnatural ways. It covered him entirely, from the tips of his gauntlets to the spiked boots that rested on the polished floor. It was said to be forged from a fallen star, or perhaps from the shadows themselves. Whispers followed him wherever he went. He never speaks. His eyes hide storms. Some say he is cursed. Her gown of deep green rustled as she shifted, drawing attention without her intending to. Her fingers toyed with a silver pendant at her throat, and her gaze never left the night. There was curiosity in her eyes, yes, but also a spark of defiance. She did not fear Kalen. The feast began in earnest. Plates of roasted meats, fresh bread, and honeyed fruits were carried in on silver platters, each dish more extravagant than the last. Minstrels played soft tunes that floated through the hall like smoke, curling around the heads of the nobles. Kalen remained silent, standing near a column, his posture perfect, his helm tucked under one arm. The room seemed to bend slightly around him, as though the air respected his presence, or feared it. Seraphine's patience frayed quickly. She leaned toward her companion, a young squire who had already spilled half a goblet of wine on his tunic in nervousness. "Tell me," she whispered, her voice like a thread of silver, "why does the knight stand there as if the world itself owes him attention? That armor is laughable, more suited for a statue than a man. I will show the hall that even a knight in black steel is not untouchable." "Lord Kalen," she said, loud enough for many to hear, "your armor is a joke." Slowly, deliberately, he raised it to his face. His eyes, black as obsidian yet flecked with silver, met Seraphine's. The silence deepened. "I wear what I must," Kalen said, his voice low and steady. It carried across the hall without effort, and every noble present felt its weight. "And I fight what I cannot change." A bold answer, yet courage wrapped in iron does not make a man free. Seraphine felt a strange thrill. It was not fear. It was recognition of a man trapped not by chains of steel but by chains of his own making. As the feast continued, Seraphine found herself unable to eat. Her mind kept returning to the night, to the heavy weight of his armor, to the silence that spoke more than words ever could. She wondered what lay beneath that black steel, what scars, what stories, what secrets. Kalen, for his part, kept a measured distance. His hands rested at his sides, yet there was tension in the way he stood, as if the armor itself were a shield against something invisible. Every so often his eyes flicked toward Seraphine, and each time she felt a pull she could not name. Later, when the hall had emptied of most guests and only the closer nobles remained, Seraphine wandered toward the castle's balcony. Rain had begun to fall, thin sheets of silver sliding down the stone. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and pine. And there he was, Kalen, standing alone near the edge, his armor dark and glinting, rain streaking down the metal. "Why are you here?" she asked softly, stepping closer. Kalen said nothing at first. The wind whipped around them, tugging at Seraphine's hair, tugging at the edges of his cloak. Then he spoke quietly, but with a weight that made her heart tighten. "This place is where I must stand, and you are where you should not be. Watching the world in all its lies." She stepped closer, daringly, closing some invisible distance between them. "What is it that binds you?" she asked, almost a whisper. Kalen's eyes glimmered with a light she could not place. Pain, yes, but also defiance. "Many things," he said, "some born of choice, some born of a curse I cannot escape." She had heard whispers, rumors of a knight bound not only by armor but by shadow, by ancient forces older than the kingdom itself. And yet here he stood, alive, unbowed, more human than any noble draped in silk and gold. "You wear your chains well," she said softly, "but even chains can be broken." The air between them seemed to thrum with tension, dangerous, magnetic, impossible to ignore. Then, as if testing the storm itself, Seraphine took a step back. She turned toward the balcony railing, letting the wind pull at her gown. She knew she was leaving him, yet the pull in her chest refused to let her look away. Kalen remained, silent and still, until she had walked several paces. Only then did he lift his helm, as if to mark her departure, and the hall seemed to hold its breath once more. That night, Seraphine could not sleep. She saw the night in her dreams, standing in shadows, eyes glimmering like distant stars, armor melting into nothing, revealing a man neither entirely safe nor entirely free. She felt a longing she did not understand, a pull toward something dangerous, something forbidden, something real. And Kalen, alone in his chamber of steel and shadow, thought of her too. The court, the crown, the whispers, they meant nothing when she was in his mind. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something dangerous, hope. The storm outside raged, rain beating against the windows, wind tearing at the banners of Valdoria. Within the castle, two souls had met, clashing in silence and fire, recognizing in each other a reflection of longing, of confinement, of the yearning for freedom. And somewhere deep in the halls of the cursed kingdom, an unseen presence watched. The shadows seemed to lean closer, waiting, knowing that the balance had shifted. The knight's armor, once a wall against the world, now marked the beginning of a story that would shake the foundations of crown and curse alike. Seraphine's heart beat faster, wild with anticipation. Kalen's hands itched to remove his helm, to step into vulnerability. And neither knew, not yet, that the first strike of destiny had already fallen, and the hall, like their hearts, would never be the same. The castle of Valdoria slept uneasily under a silver sky, heavy clouds drifting like restless spirits across the horizon. Rain had softened the earth, leaving the courtyard slick and shining, while the distant forest whispered in the wind. Yet inside the stone walls, the Hall of the Knights was quiet, almost too quiet. Shadows lingered in every corner, stretching long and uncertain. Kalen moved among them silently, his armor glinting faintly even in dim light. Every step was precise, deliberate, as if the metal itself guided him. He had not removed his helm since the confrontation with Lady Seraphine, though her words haunted him. Even chains can be broken. She wandered through the halls, her mind restless. The castle, usually oppressive and suffocating, now seemed alive with possibility. She had glimpsed something beyond the knight's armor. A man trapped, yes, but alive, human, capable of feeling and thinking, and perhaps capable of change. The following morning, the sun rose weak and pale, brushing the stone walls with light that seemed reluctant to stay. In the training yard, Kalen practiced his swordsmanship, each swing precise, measured, controlled. His movements were perfect, almost too perfect, a dance of skill that left no room for error. But beneath the steel, beneath the perfection, his mind was not at ease. Seraphine appeared at the edge of the yard, leaning casually against the railing that overlooked the practice grounds. The wind tugged at her gown, green and flowing like a river, and she watched silently. She had come not to challenge, but to understand. Kalen noticed her presence immediately, though he did not turn. "You watch too much," he said, his voice low, carrying across the yard. "And you fight too much," she replied, smiling faintly. "The armor may protect your body, but it does not protect you from yourself." And for the first time in years, Kalen wondered if he could trust someone to see him as he truly was. "You do not understand," he said finally, sheathing his sword. "There are things this armor hides that cannot be spoken." They were black and silver, storm-tossed, and full of warning. The wind shifted, rustling the leaves of the training yard as if the world itself waited. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, a fragile thread neither dared to break. Finally, Kalen shook his head. "I cannot yet." "I am not afraid of shadows, Lord Kalen. Perhaps that is why the world fears you. You do not allow yourself to be seen, and yet you are too human to stay hidden." Every time he drew his sword, every time he moved through the halls of Valdoria, the darkness within him stirred. "I am not human," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Not entirely. The curse does not allow it. And humans can love, even when the world would rather they perish." Seraphine found ways to meet him in quiet corners of the castle, under the arches of the library, near the fountains that whispered in silver streams, along the misted parapets at dawn. Each encounter was a game of shadows, words spoken softly, glances exchanged in silence. Kalen began to speak in fragments, stories of battles long past, of knights who had failed, of a kingdom that demanded more than it gave. Seraphine listened, never judging, only observing the man beneath the armor with patient curiosity. One evening in the library, Seraphine discovered an ancient tome bound in cracked black leather. The pages spoke of curses, of spirits bound to metal, of men and women who had been trapped for lifetimes. She read aloud, softly, letting Kalen hear. "There are ways to weaken it," she whispered. "Not through sword or shield, but through will, through understanding, through trust. Perhaps it is a weapon, the strongest weapon you have never tried." A messenger arrived from the northern provinces, bringing word of bandits and strange happenings in the forest. Rumors of creatures that moved between shadows, whispers of a darkness older than Valdoria itself. The council demanded Kalen lead a small force to investigate to protect the borders. Seraphine insisted on accompanying him. "I have knowledge of the old magic," she said. "I can help." The next morning they rode together through rain-soaked roads, the kingdom opening like a living map beneath their horses. The forest loomed ahead, dark and ancient, its branches clawing at the sky. Each step forward seemed to echo with destiny, each heartbeat a reminder of the invisible chains Kalen carried. At the edge of the forest, Kalen stopped. He removed his helm briefly, letting the wind touch his face. Seraphine watched him, careful to see not just the knight but the man beneath the steel. There was sadness there, yes, but also a spark, a fragile light that refused to be extinguished. "This place," he said quietly, "is where the curse first touched me, where it learned my fear, my anger, my sorrow. And yet it has never claimed you, Lady Seraphine. That surprises me. I see the man who stands beneath it." Kalen's armor began to resonate faintly, a low hum that spoke of darkness and power. Seraphine noticed it immediately. "The curse reacts," she said softly. "It knows you have allowed someone to see beyond the steel." Every step was measured, careful, as the world seemed to lean closer, waiting for what was to come. That night they made camp beside a silver stream. Kalen removed his helm entirely, letting his hair fall freely, dark and windswept. Seraphine studied him silently. He looked human now, fragile even, and yet there was a quiet strength that radiated from him without armor, without pretense. "You see me," he said finally, voice low. "Even though I am cursed, even though the armor hides what I cannot show." And yet, for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar, a small, fragile hope. A rustle in the darkness interrupted the silence. Shadows moved unnaturally along the forest floor, whispering with voices that were not entirely human. Kalen rose, sword in hand, every movement precise, controlled. Seraphine stepped beside him, her own knowledge of old magic ready, her resolve unwavering. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and in that moment, Kalen realized the truth he had tried to deny. The curse would not break him alone. Only by allowing another to see him, to trust him, could he hope to survive what was coming. The darkness in the forest shifted, waiting, and the knight and the noblewoman stood together, bound by necessity, trust, and an unspoken connection neither fully understood. To be continued, the forest of Valdoria was alive with shadows, moving with a life of their own. The night wind whispered through the trees like secrets carried on silver threads. Moonlight fell in scattered patches, illuminating moss-covered stones and the edges of dark pools. Every rustle of leaves and distant snap of a twig seemed amplified, echoing like the heartbeat of the world itself. Kalen and Seraphine walked cautiously along a narrow path, their horses close behind. The knight's armor was lighter for travel, yet still heavy with the burden of the curse. He moved with silent precision, his eyes scanning the darkness, ready for any sign of danger. Seraphine kept her staff close, its polished wood gleaming in the moonlight, her mind alive with spells and incantations she had studied in secret. "You know," Seraphine said softly, breaking the heavy quiet, "the curse will not forgive carelessness. Every step you take feeds it. Every thought you harbor strengthens it." "Not anymore." They stopped at the edge of a clearing where an ancient stone circle lay half hidden by ivy and moss. The air was thick with magic, the kind that hummed under the skin and made the hair on one's arms rise. Seraphine dismounted carefully and approached the stones. "This place," she whispered, "is older than Valdoria itself. The curse knows it, which is why it reacts so strongly here. If we are to weaken it, we must face it where it was born." There was no fear in her, none of the caution that the world demanded. Only resolve and something else, a light that could pierce the darkness of the armor if he would only let it. They entered the stone circle. Moonlight pooled in the center, revealing carvings on the stones, symbols of stars, serpents, and wings. Seraphine knelt, tracing the designs with her fingers. "These symbols are a map," she said, "a guide to the origins of your curse. If we can follow them, we may discover how to weaken it, if not destroy it entirely. He could feel the curse stirring beneath the armor, a cold, insistent pull that whispered warnings of failure and danger. And yet he stayed because she was there. And for the first time in decades, he believed, perhaps foolishly, that someone could walk beside him without fear. Seraphine began chanting softly, words long forgotten by common speech, carrying a rhythm that seemed older than the trees themselves. The air grew thick, and the moonlight shifted, forming shapes on the ground like fingers reaching toward them. Kalen knelt beside her, careful not to disturb the patterns, his eyes scanning the forest for threats. A sudden flicker of movement caught his attention, a shadow that did not belong to the trees, moving with a grace that was unnatural. Kalen rose to his feet, sword drawn, every muscle tense. "Stay behind me," he commanded. Seraphine did not flinch. Instead, she raised her staff, ready to channel the energy around them. "I am not behind you," she said, voice steady. "I am with you. Yet the one in armor walks willingly, and the lady follows. And to test whether the heart beneath the steel is as strong as it claims." Then with a gesture of its hand, the symbols on the stones began to glow faintly, a pale silver that lit the clearing. The carvings pulsed like a heartbeat, connecting to the air around them, to Kalen, to the forest itself. Kalen felt the curse shift violently under the glow, pulling at him, demanding attention. Pain, anger, sorrow, all surged in him at once. And yet, for the first time, he did not resist entirely. Seraphine's presence steadied him, anchoring him against the storm. "Focus on me," she whispered. "Not the armor, not the curse, not the shadow. Focus on what you wish to protect, what you wish to be." But slowly, carefully, he allowed a flicker of himself to rise, memories of laughter, of small victories, of moments when he had been free. The curse hissed, clawed at him, but Seraphine's words were steady, guiding, unrelenting. A sudden burst of silver light erupted from the stones, sweeping through the clearing. The shadow recoiled, letting out a cry that resonated through the trees. Kalen stumbled back, chest heaving, and for a moment the armor felt lighter, as though the curse itself had loosened its grip. Seraphine stepped forward, placing her hand on his gauntlet. "You are stronger than it believed," she said softly. "Stronger than you believed. We learn, we endure, together." Eventually they rested, sitting on the moss-covered stones, silence between them that was not empty but full of understanding, of tension, of the fragile beginnings of trust. "You know," Seraphine said after a long pause, "most people would have fled by now, either from the forest or from you. They see only the surface, never the man beneath." Then from the edge of the forest, a low rumble echoed, a warning that their trials were far from over. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and the wind whispered words that were not entirely human. Kalen rose immediately, sword at the ready, eyes scanning the darkness. Seraphine followed, calm yet alert, feeling the stirrings of magic in the air. "It tests us," she whispered. "But we are ready." The knight and the noblewoman stood together, a fragile but unyielding pair, bound by necessity, trust, and the beginnings of something far more dangerous. Hope. And somewhere beyond the trees, unseen, the shadow watched, waiting for the next move, the next mistake. The castle of Valdoria seemed to hold its breath. News had spread of Kalen and Seraphine's journey into the ancient forest, whispers of strange lights and unnatural shadows. Nobles exchanged worried glances, rumors of curses and dark magic spreading like wildfire through the corridors of the hall. Yet none dared challenge the knight, not after the events in the clearing under the moon. Kalen returned first, alone at dawn. His armor was scratched, dented, and streaked with the mud and blood of the forest. But more than that, there was a change in him. The weight he carried beneath the steel seemed lighter, almost imperceptibly so, as if some unseen part of the curse had loosened. Yet his eyes were sharper, stormier, filled with both weariness and a strange kind of hope. Seraphine arrived later, escorted by the small retinue who had been sent to track her through the forest. She stepped into the hall, her hair damp and her gown streaked with dirt, but her eyes sparkled with determination. The nobles who watched her whispered and faltered, unsure whether to admire or fear her audacity. Kalen approached her in silence. The hall seemed to grow quieter with every step they took. Torches flickered nervously along the walls, shadows stretching and bending as if they themselves awaited what was to come. Seraphine met his gaze, steady and unwavering, her hand brushing the side of her staff as though it were a talisman against the unseen. "You returned," she said softly, though her voice carried across the hall like a silver thread. "And yet," her gaze lingered on his armor, "the chains are still here." Nobles leaned forward in their seats, curious but cautious, sensing the tension without understanding it. Kalen's armor had always been a barrier, both literal and symbolic, and now the hall waited to see what he would do next. Seraphine stepped closer, fearless. "Then it is time," she said quietly, almost to herself. "It is time to let the world see who you are." The hall watched in silence, every eye fixed on the figure before them, the clinking of metal echoing like a heartbeat. When the final piece fell, Kalen stood bare before the nobles, not without strength but without pretense. His hair fell dark and windswept over his shoulders, and his chest, scarred and lean, carried the story of decades of battle, of pain, and of isolation. His eyes met Seraphine's, and in that look was a storm contained, a warning and a plea. Seraphine stepped forward. She reached out, not touching him fully, but close enough for her presence to anchor him. "Do not fear," she whispered. "You are more than the curse. You are more than the armor. You are yourself." The sight of Kalen unarmored was not just shocking, it was a revelation. No armor, no legend, only the man himself and the quiet strength that radiated from him. But the curse had not waited quietly. As Kalen's armor fell away, the shadows in the corners of the hall stirred. A low, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the stone floors. The temperature dropped. The candles flickered violently, threatening to go out. The very air seemed alive, pulsing with the presence of something old and relentless. Kalen felt it, the tug of darkness that had followed him since childhood. It pressed against him, testing his will, probing for weakness. Seraphine stepped closer, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "You are not alone," she said. "Remember what we learned in the forest. Remember the strength that comes from trust." Suddenly, from the far end of the hall, a figure emerged. Cloaked in black, features hidden beneath a hood, the figure's presence radiated an ancient power that made the torches bend toward it. Whispers ran through the hall, the voice of someone who knew both the curse and the man beneath the armor. "You dare to unmask yourself?" the figure said, voice low and echoing. "After all these years, you believe you can escape. You think the curse can be undone?" it asked, voice sharp, dangerous. "Do you not know its power? It feeds on despair, on isolation, on doubt, and yet you stand there unarmed. And my heart is not alone. Then we shall see if the bond you have forged is enough." The shadows recoiled, writhing as if wounded, and the hall seemed to vibrate with power. Kalen felt the curse pressing against him, but it was no longer all-consuming. The presence of Seraphine, the trust they had built, gave him the strength to resist. "You cannot control me," he said, voice rising over the hum of magic. "You cannot define me." The clash was silent yet thunderous in the heart, a battle of wills that shook the very foundation of Valdoria's hall. Seraphine's voice rose in unison with his, her magic weaving a shield around them, a circle of trust and courage that no shadow could penetrate. Light began to seep from her hands, silver and pure, pushing the darkness back, illuminating the hall and revealing every carved detail of the ancient stone. For a moment the shadow faltered. Then it surged one last time, a final test, reaching not just for Kalen, but for the bond between him and Seraphine. Kalen took a step forward, unflinching. "I am not alone," he declared, his voice echoing through the hall, "and I will not be broken by fear." Every noble present was frozen, staring at the knight who had once been a legend behind armor and now stood unmasked, victorious in courage and heart. Kalen turned slowly to Seraphine. His chest heaved with exhaustion, but his eyes were alive with gratitude and a new kind of strength. "Thank you," he said, voice low yet resonant. Seraphine smiled, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. "No," she said softly. "You thanked yourself. I only reminded you that the world is stronger when shared." And yet beyond the castle walls, in the quiet spaces between torches and shadows, something moved. A presence older than the kingdom, watching, waiting, knowing that the trials were far from over. Kalen and Seraphine stood together, unarmored yet unbroken, facing not just the castle and its whispers, but the world beyond. A world that would test them again, but one that now would know their strength, their courage, and the bond that could not be denied. The dawn broke over Valdoria like a soft, pale light spilling over the castle's spires, touching the banners that hung from the walls. Yet the peace was fragile, held together by a thread. Beyond the castle, in the forests and valleys, shadows stirred, ancient forces that had waited for centuries, patient and relentless. Kalen and Seraphine stood side by side on the balcony of the main hall. The knight's armor was gone entirely, replaced by the simple tunic and cloak of a man who had faced his curse and begun to claim his freedom. Seraphine's green gown shimmered in the morning light, her staff resting lightly in her hand. Both of them carried marks of battle, traces of mud and rain, but also something stronger, a bond forged through trust, courage, and unspoken understanding. "The shadow did not vanish entirely," Kalen said quietly. His eyes, black and silver, scanned the horizon, sensing the presence beyond. "It waits. It will test us again, and it will not be merciful. No matter what comes." Kalen's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, but he did not draw it. His strength was no longer just in steel, but in resolve, in trust, in the bond with Seraphine. She could feel it radiating from him, steady and sure, a quiet defiance that could bend the shadows. From the darkness, the shadow appeared again, larger this time, its form swirling like smoke. Its voice echoed across the trees, low and resonant. "You think you can undo what has endured for centuries? You dare to stand before me, unshielded, unarmed." It lunged, tendrils of darkness sweeping toward them, twisting through the air like living smoke. Kalen raised his hands instinctively, but it was Seraphine who acted first. She chanted words older than memory, weaving silver threads of magic that cut through the darkness, forming a protective circle around them both. The shadow recoiled but did not retreat. Its power was immense, ancient, and relentless, yet it had not accounted for the unity between the knight and the noblewoman. Their bond, forged in trials of courage and trust, glowed like a beacon against the darkness. Kalen met the shadow's assault with resolve. He did not strike with sword, but with will. He reached deep into himself, calling forth the fragments of hope, love, and humanity he had rediscovered through Seraphine. The curse that had once been his master now quivered under the strength of his choice, weakening with every heartbeat. "Your chains are broken," he said to the shadow, voice strong and unwavering. "I am no longer yours to command." Kalen took a step forward, shedding the last of the weight the curse had pressed upon him. Every memory of sorrow and isolation, every fear of failure was laid bare, and yet he stood unbroken, guided by Seraphine's presence. "You cannot contain us," Seraphine whispered, her voice carrying the power of the forest, of the stone circle, of the bond that had grown between them. Not the curse, not the shadows, not the fear. Kalen sank to one knee, exhaustion flowing through him, but it was not despair. It was relief, a release of tension that had gripped him for decades. Seraphine knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "You have done it," she said softly. "You faced the curse, and you have prevailed." Moonlight now bathed the clearing, soft and calm, revealing the carvings on the stones with a clarity that was almost serene. The forest itself seemed to breathe, acknowledging the victory, acknowledging the bond between them. Kalen stood slowly, brushing the dirt from his tunic. He looked at Seraphine, and for the first time he saw her not just as a guide or companion, but as someone who had changed his life entirely. She had seen the man beneath the armor, and she had stayed. She had not flinched, not even when the darkness tried to claim him. "You are remarkable," he said quietly, a statement more profound than any confession. Seraphine smiled, a warmth that cut through the chill of the early morning. "So are you," she replied. "Perhaps now the kingdom will see it too." They had heard of the journey, of the strange lights, of the encounter with shadows older than memory. And now, Kalen stood before them unarmored, yet more commanding than ever. The hall was silent, every noble holding their breath. The knight, once encased in impenetrable steel, now carried only himself, and the power of his choice, the courage he had earned, and the bond with the woman who had walked beside him through darkness. Kalen's gaze swept across the room, then rested on Seraphine. He nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of partnership, of trust, and of the quiet love that had begun to bloom between them. Seraphine met his gaze, returning the nod with equal measure, her eyes reflecting relief, pride, and something tender yet unspoken. Then, in a gesture that shocked the hall, Kalen placed a hand lightly on the edge of the throne and turned toward the nobles. "I stand here not as a knight behind armor," he said, voice steady and commanding, "but as a man who has faced his fears, his curse, and his doubts. And I stand not alone, but with one who has seen me, truly seen me, and stood by me through it all." "The curse is broken," Kalen continued. "Not by magic alone, not by steel, not by fear, but by trust, by courage, and by the bond that cannot be broken." The knight who had once been a legend behind steel was now a man who had proven that true strength lay in vulnerability, in trust, and in the courage to stand beside another. Seraphine reached out, placing her hand gently on Kalen's cheek. He leaned into her touch, eyes closing briefly, savoring the quiet strength she offered. "You have changed the kingdom," she whispered. Kalen opened his eyes, black and silver, calm and fierce all at once. "No," he said softly. "We have changed it together." Kalen and Seraphine stepped to the balcony, looking out over the kingdom. The sun had risen fully, spilling gold across the valleys and rivers. The world was still yet alive, filled with possibility and hope. "You were right," Kalen said, voice low but firm. "The heart is stronger than any curse. And together there is nothing we cannot face." And as the castle of Valdoria basked in the first light of dawn, it was clear to all who witnessed it. Even in the darkest armor, even in the harshest curse, the human heart could shine the brightest, fueled by courage, trust, and the transformative power of love. For Kalen and Seraphine, the journey was far from over. There would be challenges, trials, and shadows yet to face. But they had learned the greatest lesson. That strength alone was not enough, and that true freedom came not from steel, magic, or legend, but from the bonds forged between two souls willing to trust, to fight, and to endure together. And so, hand in hand, they faced the rising sun, ready for whatever the world would bring, unafraid, unbroken, and united.